Well, hello there. Welcome to Bloody Beaverville. My name's Josh, and I'm the conductor of this deranged, jocose expedition across the archival and primordial antiquity via applied science and telecommunication, culminating in an explosion of tomfoolery in your cochlea. And that's a fancy way of saying I'm the host of this here podcast. As some of you know, I've been doing a series on the famed scout and mountain man Christopher Kit Carson on Patreon. What you're about to hear today is the very first 2 episodes of that series that I recorded way back in May of this year. You're also going to hear the very last installment of the Kit Carson series, which I just finished recording. That's 17 episodes all total, which make up about 2.5 hours of listening time, give or take. If you're curious to hear all 17 episodes, along with the first ever disastrous and highly embarrassing episode of Bloody Beaver Podcast, you can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/bloodybeaver. Be warned though, I do not plan on making any more new posts on Patreon for the foreseeable future. I originally planned to start a new series once I was done with Kit Carson, but I just don't have time to do this once a week and put out regular episodes of Bloody Beaver and do all the normal life stuff that needs to be done, like having a job and a family. So if you want to hear more about Kit Carson, you can shell out the $5, listen to it, and then cancel. If you cancel, that won't hurt my feelings at all. Matter of fact, it's set up for you to be able to do just that. You can binge listen to all of them and then cancel so you won't be charged the next month. If you want to continue to subscribe just to support the podcast, then that won't hurt my feelings either. So without further ado, I present to you Kit Carson, episodes 1 and 2. Christopher Houston Carson was born 2 months premature in Madison County, Kentucky on Christmas Eve, 1809. Sucks to be a Christmas baby, by the way. Seems like they always get screwed. My birthday falls in the summer, so my 2 big present holidays as a kid were pretty much evenly spaced out. Presents on my birthday, then more presents to Christmas. But Christmas babies? Ain't nobody buying your ass twice as many presents as the other kids just because you happen to be born on Christmas Eve. Now, all jokes aside, Christmas and birthday presents were the least of young Christopher Carson's worries. I mentioned he was born premature. As a man, he'd only reached the height of 5 feet 4 inches, so this may have had something to do with that. Kit, as his parents would nickname him, had no memory of his life in Kentucky, as the family would move to Missouri when he was just 1 year old. His father, Lindsey Carson, was of Scotch-Irish stock and a veteran of the American Revolution, as well as a skirmish or two with the Native Americans. During one such fight, Lindsey's rifle stock was shot apart and had a couple of fingers off his left hand blown off as well. Kit's mother, Rebecca Robinson Carson, was Lindsey's second wife, and they had a huge-ass family. Lindsey fathered 5 children with his first wife and would go on to father another 10 with Rebecca. And by father, I mean that he would stick his wee-wee inside of her, slap her titties around, and then inseminate her. Back in those days, there wasn't a whole lot else to do but make babies. No internet, no TV, no electricity. Gotta get your entertainment in somehow, right? Once the Carsons arrived in Missouri, they settled down and started farming in an area known as Boone's Lick. And Boone's Lick gets its name from a salt spring in the area used by Nathan and Daniel Morgan Boone, sons of the legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone. This is also where the great Daniel Boone spent his final years. At this time, in 1810, Boone's Lick, Missouri was on the edge of the frontier. It was still a wild country. You had marauding Kickapoo, Winnebago, Sauk, and Fox tribes still in the area. And the early pioneers lived close together, in cabins built near forts, armed men standing guard while the others plowed the fields, always on guard. And this is the life that Kit Carson grew up in. Speaking of Daniel Boone, the Carson and the Boone families would become very tight. They worked together, they fought together, they defended their land together, as well as intermarrying into each other's families. As Kit grew older, as small-framed as he was, he had large hands and was described as a tough, strong, stubborn kid, but also quiet, reliable, and intelligent. Unfortunately for the Carson family, but all too common for the time, Kit would lose his father at an early age. Lindsey Carson was burning down some trees, a practice many early settlers used when they wanted to remove some dense areas of timber so they could plant some crops. And while doing so, a large limb broke off from a burning tree and crushed him to death. As you can imagine, this was disastrous for the Carson family. Kit's mom, Rebecca, still had 10 children at home, and now they were plunged into poverty. This is also, by one account I read, the time Kit's formal education came to an end. He had to stop going to school and focus on the family farm. Doing chores, helping out, working the fields, and of course hunting to put meat on the table. In his own words, he said at this time, quote, "I jumped to my rifle and threw down my spelling book, and there it lies." So about Kit's education. He was 8 when his father died, and I would assume that even in the early 19th century, most children who attended school at least knew the basics of reading and writing by the age of 8. But everything I've read about Kit states that he was illiterate his entire life. One source I read said that he never even attended one day of school. Obviously he did, or he wouldn't have made the comment about the spelling book. But it's likely by the time he became an adult that he may have forgotten what few lessons he learned in those early days in a frontier schoolhouse. As an adult, he would learn to spell out his name in the form of C. Carson. For a short amount of time, Kit became a ward of a neighbor family. Maybe just to lessen the burden on his mother with all those mouths to feed. But in 1822, when Kit was 13, his mother remarried, and as tends to happen, Kit and his stepdad did not get along. I get that. I'm lucky enough to still be blessed to have both my parents not only still alive, but they're still married. They've been married for 55 years, if you can believe that. If my dad, who I definitely idolized as a kid, passed away when I was young, and my mom remarried, I don't care who she married, I'd hate that motherfucker. She could have remarried to an ex-Navy SEAL doctor millionaire who did everything in his power to make nice with me, and I'd still have tormented the dude. You know why? Because he's not my dad. So, I always get it when step-kids and step-parents don't get along, and I do sympathize with the step-parents as well. Don't get me wrong about that. It's hard to replace a parent and try to fill those shoes, especially when that parent has passed away. So, moving forward, at the age of 14, Kit was apprenticed to a saddle maker named David Workman in the small nearby settlement of Franklin, Missouri. And Kit fucking hated this job. He hadn't been to school in at least 6 years, probably spent a good deal of his free time out in the woods hunting game for the family, and now all of a sudden, he's stuck in this saddler shop doing mind-numbingly boring work. And oh boy, I sure do know how that feels. I've had plenty of jobs so boring that you look at the clock and you swear you can see that little second hand ticking backwards. The ironic thing is, as much as Kit hated working in that saddler shop, this is more than likely what caused him to head west and live the life that he would live. Franklin was the jumping off point for the fairly new Santa Fe Trail. Back when Spain was in control of Mexico, they strictly forbid any and all trade with the United States. But once Mexico gained its independence, all that changed, hence the Santa Fe Trail. The initial trail was known as the Mountain Route. It followed the Arkansas River to the Great Plains of present-day Colorado, then crossed over to the Purgatory River, or the Picket Wire River, as many would come to call it, and across the very narrow Raton Mountain Pass into Santa Fe in present-day New Mexico. The trail then morphed into a shorter, less dangerous path known as the Cimarron Route. This one followed the Arkansas River as well, but only to around the area where Dodge City, Kansas would one day pop up. The trail then snaked through southwest Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle before venturing into the Round Mound and Point of Rocks area of New Mexico. And then, once they were able to cross the Glorieta Mountain Pass, they'd end up in Santa Fe. Like I said, this route was shorter and less dangerous, but not without danger or hardships. A lot of times, water would be scarce, and they were always at risk of being attacked by hostile native war parties. And since New Mexico was now open to trade with Americans, plenty of the rough breed known as the Mountain Men were spending time in the area. Often they head back to Missouri via the Santa Fe Trail and find themselves in young Kit's saddler shop, getting their saddles repaired. Imagine you're a bored teenager enduring day after day of drudgery, and all of a sudden your world is exposed to these wild men, long beards, dressed in animal skins and beads, telling all kinds of stories of dangerous adventures, wild savages, beautiful Spanish maidens, the prairies full of buffalo as far as the eye can see, rivers so full of beaver that all a man had to do was just reach in with his hands and grab them up. We need not to assume that this piqued young Kit Carson's imagination and sense of adventure, because we know for a fact it did. It wouldn't be very much longer until Kit decided to break his contract of apprenticeship and head west on the Santa Fe Trail. He would later describe his employer as a good man, but, quote, "The business did not suit me and I decided to leave him," saying that if he stayed on at the saddle shop, he would have to pass his life in, quote, "labor that was distasteful to me." Reminds me of that Henry David Thoreau quote, "Most men live quiet lives of desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them." Well, Kit Carson would go on to do many things, but living a dull life of quiet desperation would not be one of them. And so it was that at the age of 16, Kit signed on as a laborer with a merchant wagon train headed west to Santa Fe. But by doing so, he was breaking the law. Back in those days, being an apprentice was almost like indentured servitude. You were bound by law to work for your boss for a certain amount of years in exchange for them teaching you their trade. And they were bound by law to report you if you skipped out on them, which David Workman, Kit's employer, did. Here's the notice he put in the local paper, the Missouri Intelligence. It reads, "Notice is hereby given to all persons that Christopher Carson, a boy of about 16 years old, small of his age but thick-set, light hair, ran away from the subscriber, living in Franklin, Howard County, Missouri, to whom he had been bound to learn the saddler's trade, on or about the 1st of September last. He is supposed to have made his way towards the upper part of the state. All persons are notified not to harbor, support, or assist said boy under the penalty of the law. 1 cent reward will be given to any person who will bring back said boy." So not only did Workman wait an entire month before posting this advertisement, but he also pointed people in the wrong direction. He knew full well that Carson was headed west and not upstate. And to solidify why I believe Workman wished Carson luck on his adventure, he only offered up 1 cent in reward money. I know a penny went a lot farther in 1825 than it does nowadays, but still, 1 penny to go off chasing some truant kid? It seems pretty clear to me that Workman not only wished Carson well, but, he might have also aided in the getaway. So good on him. No wonder Carson would later in life refer to Workman as a good man. The journey west wasn't too bad. The only incident that Carson recalled was that of a man accidentally shooting himself in the arm. The wound became infected and gangrene was starting to spread, but the man wouldn't consent to having his arm amputated. With every bump of the wagon, he'd cry out in agony. And every day, those black streaks of death were creeping further and further up his arm. The men of the caravan were getting a little irritated listening to the man's constant screams of pain, and besides, they didn't just want to sit around and let the dude die. So they held him down and went to work, first slicing open the skin with a razor, while another man hacked through the bone with an old saw, while yet a third man used a bolt from a wagon, heated in a fire, cauterized the severed arteries. Motherfucking shit. Can you imagine getting operated on in such a fashion? Not by a doctor, but by the type of rough and dirty men who travel the Santa Fe Trail with zero anesthesia. If he was lucky, maybe they poured enough whiskey down his throat until he was numb. But there's no amount of whiskey, short of killing a man, that will dull the pain of a saw grinding through your damn bone. I'm hoping the man was at least able to pass out sometime during the operation. By the way, no way to clean the wound. No antibacterial cream or hydrogen peroxide. They simply applied a plaster of tar taken from a wagon axle and slapped it on his stump. According to Carson, the man was perfectly well by the time they arrived in New Mexico. The Santa Fe Trail ended, and its namesake, obviously, Santa Fe, New Mexico, but Kit didn't stay there long. He made his way north to the mountain village of Tejas, the capital of the Southwest fur trade. And a lot of mountain men would winter in the area, taking time to mend their traps, get their drink on, spend time with the local Spanish beauties. And it was this strange group of men that Kit found himself drawn to. He wanted to be a mountain man, and by God, he would become a mountain man, as soon as he could prove to them that he was worthy and capable of doing so. That first winter in Tejas, Kit met up with an old family friend from Missouri named Matthew Kincaid, who sort of took Kit under his wings. Kincaid was himself a seasoned frontiersman by this point, and friend to the local fur trappers. And under his tutelage, Kit began his real apprenticeship, that of the mountain man. All throughout those long snowy months, Kit began practicing Spanish as well as several native languages. He learned how to dress like a mountain man, and smoke cured buckskins likely made from old teepees. He learned how to hunt, kill, and quarter a buffalo, as well as how to enjoy the taste of a still hot liver cut from the freshly dead beast seasoned with bile from its gallbladder, a true frontier delicacy. Eventually, young Kit Carson hired on as a cook for a trapper named Ewan Young. Young had opened up a store there in Tejas to help outfit trapping expeditions. So this exposed Kit to more and more of these wild mountain men, their habits, their unique profane way of talking. And by spring of 1828, Carson was fluent enough in Espanol that he hired on as a translator for a merchant caravan that was headed deep into the heart of Mexico, Chihuahua City bound. After Kit completed this 1,000-mile journey, he took a job as a teamster for a copper mine in southwestern New Mexico, and by this time he's a full-grown man, and he's already started to prove that he's a steady, capable hand, even if he is still a little green around the edges. A year after he left for Mexico, his dream finally came true. Ewan Young asked Kit to join up with him in a party of some 40-odd trappers bound for the Gila River country in pursuit of beaver. Something to note about this particular trip. It was illegal as fuck. Most of the fur trappers who hung around Tejas would head north into the Rocky Mountains when it came time to trap, but the government of Santa Fe wasn't too keen on these gringos trapping in their territory. So, to successfully pull the wool over the eyes of these government officials, the party started off north, then doubled back and rode southwest, eventually striking the scarcely trapped and beaver-rich Gila River country. Once they arrived, Carson's education really began. He learned the fine art of trapping, how to tell which areas looked the most promising, how to keep an eye out for the telltale slicks where the beavers slide from the bank into the river. He learned how to extract castor from the beaver's sex glands and use it to bait traps. And most importantly, he learned how to survive. No non-native in the history of North America has ever had more of an intimate knowledge of the ways of the American Indian as these mountain men did. They lived with them, they traded with them, gambled and partied with them, married them, had half-native children, fought against them and fought with them. Washington Irving once wrote about the mountain men, quote, "It is a matter of vanity and ambition with them to discard everything that may bear the stamp of civilized life and to adopt the manners, gestures, and even the walk of the Indian. You cannot pay a free trapper a greater compliment than to persuade him that you have mistaken him for an Indian brave." These men Kit rode on with his first expedition could tell the difference between a war party and a peaceful group of natives just looking to parlay or trade. And they knew how the mind of a warrior operated. Native Americans didn't fight like the white soldiers back east did. They didn't think of war in the sense of prolonged campaigns. They were raiders who fought smart when the odds were in their favor. And they were masters of the ambush. Kit Carson had to learn these lessons quick if he hoped to keep his hair for more than a couple seasons in the mountains. And who better to learn from than these rank, veteran trappers? Another note about mountain men. There was a congressional survey conducted in 1831 on the fur trapping profession. The description of the way of life the mountain men led was thus, quote, "The whole operation is full of exposures and privations. leading to premature exhaustion and disability. Few of those engaged in it reach an advanced stage of life. The labor is excessive, subsistence scanty, and the Indians are ever liable to sudden and violent paroxysms of passion in which they spare neither friend nor foe." End quote. And if you're like me and you didn't know what the fuck a paroxysm is, I looked it up and it's defined as a sudden, violent emotion or action. Many a trapper rode out into the vast western wilderness never to be seen again. If they didn't show up to the next rendezvous, everyone just assumed old so-and-so went under. And it could happen a number of ways. You could die of thirst, you could freeze to death, get eaten by a grizzly, bit by a rattler, get thrown from your horse, get caught in an avalanche, and of course, killed by a war party of natives. Then, I just learned this recently, there was the ever-present cobra soplex spiders native to the Rocky Mountains of North America. And this is so creepy. They lay eggs under your skin, and the larvae will work their way down to your nutsack and eventually work their way out. Before long, your balls look like Medusa, with hundreds of tiny worms just slowly slithering out of your testes. And nah, that part about the spiders is not true. At least, I hope it's not true. But I hope you believed it for at least like half a second. And I hope it made you feel really uncomfortable, because I'm an asshole. Anyway, going forward, just to show how precarious the life of a mountain man was, on Kit's very first trapping expedition in the Gila River country, their camp was approached by a large group of Apache. The trappers, sensing this wasn't just a social visit, concealed themselves as best they could beneath saddles and blankets. In Carson's own words, the hills were covered with Indians. And as the Apache swooped down on what they considered easy pickings, the trappers sprang up and opened fire. Carson right alongside them. Matter of fact, he drilled an Apache warrior straight through the heart. Once the fight was over, Kit approached the dead Apache, pulled out his knife, and removed the warrior's scalp. He had just taken his first life and scalp at the age of 19. But what's more, he proved to his companions that he was a man that could be counted on to stand at your side when the shit hits the fan. From there, the expedition headed west into what was known as Alto, California, and trapped and traded in Sacramento, all the way south to Los Angeles, before returning to New Mexico, doing a little trapping along the Colorado River as well, before finally headed back to Tejas in April of 1830. This trip was a huge success, especially for Ewan Young. At the time of his return to Tejas with the proceeds of the expedition, Young was established as one of the wealthiest Norte Americanos in Mexican territory. Kit Carson would continue to trap beaver for nearly another decade. He was a man amongst men at this point, some of the toughest men this country has ever known. An old campfire tale mountain men used to swap about Carson, no idea if it's actually true, these men did love their tall tales, was that Kit and 5 other trappers were caught on the open plains by a Comanche war party. With nowhere to go and no water for miles around, the men cut the throats of their mules and took cover behind them, much like Gus McCrae did in Lonesome Dove. Each time the Comanche would rush in, half of the men would fire their rifles, while the other half reloaded, and their aim was deadly accurate. Not only did the Comanche not like losing 3 warriors on each charge, but their horses didn't like to smell all that fresh blood coming from the mules, so they would shy away when they got too close. They held the Comanche off all day and snuck out under the cover of darkness, making a 75-mile hike to the nearest watering hole. And they all survived. Like I said, I'm not sure if that story's true, but these were the type of men capable of such feats. Eventually, Kit would work his way up north, up into the Rocky Mountains. He was there with Broken Hand Fitzpatrick and a group of trappers in 31, and I'm not sure when he attended his first rendezvous, though. Ah, the rendezvous, an event mountain men look forward to all year. The annual rendezvous was a gathering where trappers and mountain men sold their furs, plues as they called them, and replenished their supplies. The large fur companies put together teamster-driven mule trains, which packed in whiskey and supplies from back east to a pre-announced location each spring, summer, and set up sort of a trading fair, a rendezvous. And at the season's end, they packed the furs back east to the markets. This was helpful for the trappers because instead of making a dangerous journey across the Great Plains all the way to St. Louis to sell their furs and resupply, they could stay in the mountains and have the goods and buyers come to them. It also gave them a couple of months to unwind, get together with old friends, drink, fuck, gamble, basically party like it's 1799. But nothing in life comes without a cost. The supplies brought from back east had a huge markup on the price. And it was a buyer market as far as the furs went. The fur companies paid what they wanted to pay for the furs, and the trappers could either accept it or waste a few months traveling back east to get better prices. So what sort of supplies would a mountain man need to load up with at the rendezvous? If you're smart, before you ever take a sip off that whiskey jug, you buy all your essentials. First, you go and trade in your furs. Like I said, the mountain men called them plues. Your beaver plues would be graded on size and quality, and you'd be given credit for them at the dry goods counter or wagon or tin or whatever the hell the traders had set up. That's where you go for your supplies. Money didn't pass through hands at the rendezvous, only credit. First and foremost, hopefully you don't have to buy a new rifle. By the way, most of these men carried more than one rifle. This is the era of the single-shot black powder rifles. Same thing goes for the pistols. Mountain men didn't have any 6-shooters or revolvers, not in their heyday at least. You get in a pinch and you don't have time to reload, you can maybe get off 2 shots with your rifle and then 2 more shots with your pistols, and then it's close-in work with tomahawk, knife, fist, teeth, meanness, and whoever has the strongest will to live. But back to supplies. What you would need to buy are stuff to maintain your rifle. If you had a percussion rifle, you need to stock up on nipple huggers or caps. An older rifle, you'll need to buy some spare flints. Then you got to make sure you stock up on plenty of powder and lead, some spare wiping sticks. And no, these weren't for wiping your ass. The wiping sticks were used to clean the barrel of the rifles. Your rifle is your life in the backcountry. A good rifle with spare parts, powder, and lead will keep you fed. It's your means of defense if you're attacked. Essentially, it's your lifeline. You want to stock up on the tools of your trade. You might need to buy some more traps or, pay somebody to fix the traps you already have. Some spare awls to tend to leather, some axes or hatchets, butcher knives, maybe some steel and flint for sparking a fire. Maybe you need a new iron kettle. Definitely going to need some extra blankets. You're going to have to stay warm come winter. And besides, blankets are always a good trade item. If you didn't have a Native American wife to make you some new buckskins and moccasins and maybe a stock of dried meat and pemmican, you could trade for that as well from the many tribes that took up residence at Rendezvous. Speaking of trade goods, you're going to have to do better than just a few blankets. Paint, beads, mirrors, all sorts of trinkets that the Native Americans you encounter may be interested in, especially the lady variety of Native Americans, if you know what I mean. Okay. Various colored pieces of cloth will round off your trading items. After that comes your luxury items. These are the items that probably aren't going to last you the entire year, but they will make life on the trail a little more bearable for a time at least. Stuff like tobacco, coffee, flour, maybe some pepper to spice up your meals. Maybe you got a sweet tooth and want some sugar for your coffee, or some dried raisins or some such shit. Then and only then did you take what was left and go drinking and whoring and gambling. And like I said, I'm not sure which rendezvous Kit Carson first attended, but he was most definitely present at the 1835 rendezvous that was held near present-day Daniel, Wyoming. He was 25 years old, in the prime of his life, and already well respected amongst his peers. And it looked like he might be thinking about taking a wife. If you've ever watched The Godfather, hopefully you have, there's that scene where Michael Corleone first lays eyes on the beautiful Apollonia, and he's speechless. One of his companions remarks that Michael has been, quote, hit by the thunderbolt. Well, that thunderbolt was about to hit old Kit Carson. Not in the form of a Sicilian beauty, though. In his case, it was an Arapaho girl that went by the name of Singing Grass, or in her native tongue, the name suggesting the sound of prairie wind whipping through the tall grass. Kit fell and fell hard for Singing Grass. He had to have her, and as you'll soon come to find out, he was more than willing to kill to protect her honor. All right, y'all, I think that's about it for episode 2 on the life of Kit Carson. Glad y'all are still listening. And once again, thank you for all the support through Patreon. Y'all truly make all of this worth it. Stay tuned for episode 3 and find out what happens between Kit Carson and Singing Grass and the giant of a man Kit had to go through to get to her. Also, as always, feel free to hit me up at bloodybeaverpodcast@gmail.com or visit bloodybeaver.com and hit that contact button. Till next time. All right. And just as a quick summary, Kit Carson would become a highly respected mountain man and a legend in his own time. Like seriously, he actually saw the fictionalized and romanticized books that were written about him while he was still alive. Kit married 3 times, the first 2 marriages to Native American ladies and the third and final time to a Mexican woman named Josefa. He had a bunch of kids and was always on the move. He scouted for the great pathfinder John C. Fremont, took part in the Bear Flag Revolt, the Mexican-American War, even served in the Civil War. Carson took on and defeated the Mescalero Apache as well as the great Navajo Nation, resulting in the misery known as the Long Walk. He took part in the first Battle of Adobe Walls, where he and his New Mexico volunteers fought off almost insurmountable odds and escaped the Comanche and Kiowa that had him surrounded. All of this and more is covered in this series, culminating in this last episode. Like I said, if you want to fill in the blanks, it can be found at patreon.com/bloodybeaver. By the way, I lean very heavily on the book Blood and Thunder, written by Hampton Sides while doing research on Kit Carson. It's a hell of a book, and if you're interested in Kit, as well as the history of the Navajo, I highly suggest checking it out. I will leave a link for it in this episode's description as well. I now present to you episode 17 of the Kit Carson series. Adios. After the fight at Adobe Walls, Kit spent the next 3.5 years on the move. First, he was assigned to Fort Union, then Fort Garland, and finally Fort Lyon in present-day Colorado. During this time, Carson led negotiations with tribes on behalf of the United States military, and even traveled to St. Louis to advise General Sherman. He mostly made these trips in an army ambulance, as his health no longer allowed him to ride on horseback. "I am now quite old and worn out," he wrote to a relative, "and hardly my own master." His last trip took him all the way back to Washington, D.C. to help negotiate a treaty for his beloved Ute tribe. He was advised not to take the trip due to his health, and he himself didn't want to go, since his wife was 7 months pregnant. But he went anyway to help out his old friend Chief Yore. Good old Kit, always doing his duty. And it was a busy trip. Carson took the Ute on a tour of the capital, visiting the Washington Monument and taking in Turkish bathhouses. They even got to visit President Andrew Johnson at the White House, as well as Kit's old friend, the Pathfinder John C. Fremont. Fremont was shocked at Carson's appearance, saying that he was, quote, greatly altered by suffering. And he was. While in D.C., he posed for a picture. Now, do me a favor. Go to Google and type in Kit Carson, then click on images. A whole bunch are going to pop up. There's one of him when he looks to be in his mid-30s or early 40s, clean-shaven and wearing a hat and a bow tie. Looks strong and healthy. Doesn't look like the type of guy you could beat in a grappling match. Let's just say that. There's a few others of him in military uniforms, one of him posing next to Fremont, and then there's that other picture, the one that doesn't quite fit in. Partly it's due to the mustache, but mostly it's due to his size. The picture I'm talking about is that one with Carson dressed to the nines, wearing a suit and sitting in a chair, his legs crossed with his hands folded in his lap. This is the picture, that last one taken of him in D.C. Notice how gaunt he is, how skinny compared to all the other pictures. I always wondered why it was that this one picture was so different from the others, and now I know. The man was on his way out. But he didn't give up all hope. While he was back east, he got a second opinion. Kit took a train with some of the Utes all the way to New York City and conferred with a Dr. Louis Albert Sayer. And unfortunately for Kit, the doc told him what he already knew. He had an aneurysm of the aorta. He could die at any moment, and there was absolutely nothing the doctor, or anybody else, could do for him. Later that night, while staying at the Metropolitan Hotel on Broadway, Kit had a bad dream that he was dying and woke up in a sweat, his head being cradled by one of the Ute chiefs. "You called for your Lord Jesus," the Ute told Kit. Carson didn't remember doing so, but he later remarked that it's only him that could help me where I stand now. He knew that he didn't have much time left and he needed to get home and see his wife one last time. He was quoted as saying of Josefa, "If I died out here," meaning back east, "it'd kill Josefa. I must get home, and I think I can do it." He took the railroad all the way to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and a stagecoach from there to Denver. From Denver, he rode the rest of the way lying in the back of an open wagon, covered in blankets, and finally, on April 11th, 1868, his very pregnant, ready to pop at any moment wife Josefa met him at La Junta, Colorado. And Kit was just in time. 2 days later, he and Josefa welcomed a brand new baby girl into the world. Named her Josefita. Meanwhile, in New Mexico, things sure as hell hadn't improved at the Bosque Redondo since Kit left. Not for either the Navajo nor the Mescalero Apache. To General Carleton's credit, he wasn't without sympathy. "These Indians are upon my hands," he wrote. "I cannot see them perish either from nakedness or hunger." He also said of the Navajo that they will, quote, "upbraid us for having taken their birthright and left them to perish with other tribes we have acquired ever since the Pilgrims stepped on the shore at Plymouth. This has been done too often. For pity's sake, if moved not by any other consideration, for once treat the Indian as he deserves to be treated." Powerful words from a man who was all for total military defeat of the Navajo. But I guess even he was starting to recognize that you can't just treat your fellow human beings like dogs. The reservation was a disaster, and he was trying, albeit ineffectively, to right that ship. He was able to secure tons of emergency food to the Bosque, as well as a herd of 4,000 sheep with strict instructions on butchering so that literally none of the animals went to waste. Anything left over was turned into soups, blood pudding, and even haggis. Y'all ever try haggis before? I haven't, but I know that I got some listeners out there in Scotland. According to Wikipedia, the last and final word on all things factual, haggis is described as a savory pudding containing sheep's heart, lung, and liver, mixed with onions, oatmeal, and spices. I believe I'll pass. Me and the Mescalero Apache, they weren't having none of that haggis bullshit, and they weren't too happy about their living conditions at the Bosque either. They didn't want to work like the white man worked. And I know some people will say that's a lazy way of living. You know, if you don't work, you don't eat, right? Well, this is what Mescalero Chief Cadet had to say about it. "Let me tell you what we think. You begin when you were little to work hard. After you get to be men, you build big houses, big towns, and everything else in proportion. Then, after you have them all, you die and leave them behind. Now, we call that slavery. You are slaves from the time you begin to talk until you die, but we are as free as air. The Mexicans and others work for us. Our wants are few and easily supplied. The river, the wood, the plain yield all that we require. We will not be slaves, nor will we send our children to your schools where they will only learn to become like yourselves." End quote. Damn, Cadet. I think he's onto something. You know, the whole slave to your possessions kind of thing. Sounds like something Henry David Thoreau, who I quoted at the very beginning of this series, would write. And he did write similar things. Stuff like, most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only indispensable, but hindrances to the elevation of mankind. And all good things are wild and free. And one of my favorites, quote, "You gotta eat that booty like it's groceries." No, I'm just kidding about that last one. That was someone else. But you get the picture. Don't let the things you own you. Before you know it, you're working like a damn slave trying to pay off a boat and a house and all kinds of other bullshit. I'll give you for instance. I was in a sporting goods store, not going to say which one, just yesterday, and they had a Yeti dog bowl for sale for $50. $50 fucking to give your dogs water with a stupid ass Yeti logo on it. And I'm not trying to hate on the Yeti brand or anything like that. But a dog bowl, man? This is our society. No wonder Chief Cadet didn't want to see his people work like slaves just so they could buy something as trivial as a damn dog bowl that costs $50. And sure enough, the Mescalero put these minimalistic lifestyle ideals into action when they bolted out of the bosque in the dead of the night in November of 1865, taking a couple hundred stolen Navajo ponies with them. And they were not pursued. Before Kit Carson headed to D.C., he was visited by a U.S. Senator named James Doolittle, who happened to be the chairman of a committee investigating Indian policy. He came to New Mexico to look into the atrocious Sand Creek Massacre as well as the failure known as the Bosque Redondo. He spent a night at Casa de Carson and listened carefully to the old mountain man's opinions when it came to the Native Americans. I came to this country in 1826, Kit said, and since that time have become pretty well acquainted with the Indian tribes, both in peace and war. Carson explained to Doolittle that most of the current Indian troubles stem from, quote, aggressions of whites, and attacked Chivington, who led the Sand Creek Massacre, as being treacherous, brutal, and cowardly. He explained how the conflict between the New Mexicans and the Navajo had always existed with continual thievery back and forth, and that even though Bosque Redondo was a failure, in his opinion, if the Navajo were sent back home, the old hostilities would soon commence again. Kit spoke of the Ute, the Jicarillas, the Comanche, how they were all headed towards extinction, quote, due in great measure to their intercourse with white men, and how they had nowhere to go, how civilization encircles them. Despite his trying, General Carleton was removed from command of the Bosque in September of 1866. By the spring of 1868, the Navajo refused to plant crops altogether. They had given up. According to author Hampton Sides, they spent their days gathered around the issue house like steel filings around a lodestone, waiting for their daily dole. 3,000 Navajos died at Bosque Redondo, by the way. 3,000. That's 1 out of every 3 captives that were held there. This is the type of shit they don't teach us in school. Back in Colorado, Kit Carson's wife, Josefa, wasn't feeling too good after giving birth. She was suffering from complications, an infection that caused a fever that she couldn't seem to shake. The post surgeon from Fort Lyon, Dr. Henry Tilton, visited her and later remarked that she was a woman who evidently had been very handsome, but sickness had leached the beauty from her face. On April 27th, she was feeling slightly better and got out of bed to brush the hair of her 13-year-old daughter, Teresina. That good feeling quickly went away as she suddenly grew weak and yelled out, Cristobal. That's Spanish for Christopher. That's what she called Kit. Cristobal, come here. This caused Carson to pull himself off his own sick bed and shuffle over to her, taking his wife into his arms. Josefa's last words as she looked into her husband's face were, I am very sick. And then she died there in his arms. She was 40 years old. According to Carson's son Charles, Kit seemed just to kind of pine away after his wife's death. He sent for Ignatia Bent, Josefa's sister and the widow of Charles Bent, to come care for his motherless children. And as soon as she showed up, Carson took a turn for the worse, started spitting up blood, and was sent across the river to Fort Lyon so Doc Tilton could keep a watch on him around the clock. There was a big bulge just steadily growing under the back of his lower neck. His upper chest was constantly under pressure. His heart raced. Felt like he was suffocating at times. To lessen the pain, Doc Tilton gave Kit a bottle of opium cut with cherry syrup, which, by the way, sounds way more delicious than haggis. The doc also gave Kit a muscle sedative, and when the pain got too unbearable, he would dose the patient with chloroform. He warned Kit that the chloroform could kill him if he gave him the wrong dose, but Carson didn't care. He begged me not to let him suffer such tortures, Doc Tilton later wrote, and if I killed him by attempted relief, it would be much better than death by suffocation. Amen to that. Kit used this time to assess his life and to draw up a will. He was acutely aware of the fact that he had little to show for the full life that he had lived. His estimated assets, mostly in promissory notes that people owed him, came out to about $9,000. That's $165,000 in today's money. And like I said, that's what people owed him. Good luck getting him to pay up once he died. For all intents and purposes, Carson was basically destitute. The dirt over his wife's grave was still fresh, and Kit had 7 children to think about. The youngest, Josefita, was only 11 days old. Speaking of the kids, they were staying about 5 miles away in Boggsville. To get to Fort Lyon, they had to cross both the picket wire and the Arkansas rivers. But that was okay with Carson. He was finding it painful to have his family see him in his current condition. He didn't want their last memory of him to be like that. And like it or not, though, 2 of his sons, 14-year-old William and 7-year-old Charles, braved the rivers and came to visit their old dad one day. Kit sat up in bed, put on a brave face, and sent his boys off with gifts, brand new hats. And as far as I know, that's the last time they saw their father alive. 26 days after Josefa's death, Kit suddenly started feeling a little bit better, much like Josefa did in her final moments. He told Doc Tilton he was hungry, but he didn't want any of that bullshit gruel he'd been eating. Nah, he wanted some real food. Big buffalo steak, cooked rare like the old days. Served up with some red chili and a big pot of coffee. After that, a smoke from his pipe, and there's a little bit of a digestif, if you will. And he got just that. He ate his fill and lit his pipe and laid back on his buffalo robes. I kind of wonder what he was thinking about. Was he worried about his family, what they'd do without him? Or was he thinking about the glory days, back when you could ride for a week without seeing another white man? Back before the railroads and the lawyers and the bankers came out west and fucked everything up with their fancy laws and etiquettes and all that good stuff. Wonder if he thought back about his old compañeros who had already gone under. Guys like Jed Smith, Bill Sublett, Jim Beckwith, Charles Bent, old Bill Williams. Maybe he thought about the rendezvous he attended, up in the Rocky Mountains back when he was young and a free trapper and the king of his domain. Or maybe he thought about his first wife, Singing Grass, that beautiful Arapaho who gave him his first child. Maybe he thought about the first time he lay with her in a teepee, worn by buffalo robes just like the kind he was laying on there as he smoked his last pipe. Wonder if he regretted anything, opening up the country and leading the military to the Navajo and the other tribes. The devastation left in his wake all those years prior on Klamath Lake. No telling what was going on through Kit's mind. Maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe he was just thinking about nothing. All we know for sure is that afternoon at 4:25, he began coughing violently, worse than ever, blood spurting from his lips. The aneurysm had finally ruptured. "Doctor," he yelled out. "Compadre. Adios." And with that, the old scout gave up the ghost, his head supported by Dr. Tilton, who said, quote, "This is the last of the general." Kit Carson was buried next to his wife, Josefa. They'd been married for 25 years and died less than a month apart. The flag at Fort Lyon was flown at half-mast and a bugler played taps. A few days later, a newspaper out of Denver ran an obit for Carson, which read, "Over what an immense expanse of plains, of snow-clad sierras, of rivers, lakes, and seas, has he cut the first paths. His guiding instinct was an innate chivalry. He had in him a personal courage which came forth when he wanted, like lightning from a cloud." 5 days after Carson's death, General Tecumseh Sherman visited the Bosque, saw the conditions, and drew up a new treaty, giving the Navajo a huge swath of land the size of Ohio to call their own. The area wasn't as big as their original territory, but it was in their homeland, the homeland that they were forced out of years prior on the Long Walk. The morning of June 18th, 1868, their journey back home began, a mass exodus from imprisonment. When they reached the Rio Grande River and saw the Blue Bead Mountains for the first time since leaving, they fell to their knees and wept, showing their young children the homeland that they had only heard about. As they continued their march home, they chanted, "Beauty before us, beauty behind us, beauty around us, in beauty we walk. It is finished in beauty." And that is about all I've got on Kit Carson. Woo! I thought it'd only be like 5 or 6 episodes, and it turned out to be 17. All of you supporting me on Patreon who've been following along, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. Like I said last week, this will be my last post on Patreon for a while. I was going to start another series, but I just don't have time. If y'all want to unsubscribe, please do so. You are not going to hurt my feelings. If you want to continue to subscribe and support the podcast, that's not going to hurt my feelings either. And for those of you who are not Patreon members, you can find the entire series on patreon.com/Bloody Beaver. I will put a link in the description. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for the comments, the emails, the topic suggestions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please keep them rolling in. And stay tuned. New episode in the works right now on the law west of the Pecos, Judge Roy Bean. Did you know that Judge Roy Bean wore that beard to cover up rope burns on his neck from a botched lynching? Did you know that Judge Roy Bean was kind of a scoundrel who, while working as a milkman, used to thin out the milk with creek water until an angry customer found a damn minnow swimming around in the milk? True story. Stay tuned to find out all about this and more on the next episode of Bloody Beaver Podcast on the great and judicial and mighty Judge Roy Bean.